Join and call to order our regular meeting of the Board of County Commissioners. It is still Tuesday, July 22nd, 2025. Our afternoon agenda item starts with a Health and Human Services item, a discussion in the matter of funding family and child services. We have Director Eve Gray with us, and Brian Johnson, the Public Health Manager, and Chelsea Whitney, the Family, Child, and Health Nursing Supervisor. We have a great panel ahead of us, and you have plenty of time to tell us what we need to know, so please go ahead anytime.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name's Chelsea Whitney, and as you just mentioned, I am one of the nursing supervisors for Family and Child Health in Public Health.
And Brian Johnson, the Healthy Communities Unit Manager for Public Health.
Today we're going to talk with you a little bit about our full service array in Family and Child Health that we're offering and how it supports the community, some outcomes with the Nurse Family Partnership Program locally after more than a decade of operation, an opportunity on the horizon for our community for some expanded eligibility for services, Medicaid billing requirements, and then some funding proposals that we are bringing forward today after some legislative decisions that were made in the last session. So, I already introduced myself and Brian. We also have two other supervisors that flesh out our team, Alicia Prezina, the other Family and Child Health Nursing Supervisor, and Ann Harris, our Systems and Outreach Supervisor. So as we begin today, I want to take a moment to remind us all why Family and Child Health Services exist here in Lane County. We exist to support the new families, the new moms, the new dads, the new parents, and the circle of support caring for the newest little Lane County residents and members, our new babies. One of the many things that unite us all in our community is a desire for thriving, healthy families and babies and toddlers who are healthy, supported, and grow up in safe, nurturing, caring communities. I'd like you all, if you've been fortunate enough to be a parent, to take a moment to call to mind those feelings when you first welcomed your first child home. What were they? Excitement, love, exhaustion, joy, overwhelm, maybe even a touch of fear. Letting me take this little bundle home? I can do this? You can. There is nothing quite as magical or as overwhelmingly exhausting as caring for a newborn. When you think about those first days with your first new baby, think about too, who was the support circle around you? Was it maybe your mother, a sibling, a caring neighbor, your faith community? And what sort of supports they provided? I'd like you to think about what those early days with your first baby would have been like if you hadn't had a circle of support. Unfortunately, for far too many new babies, they come home without the circle of support we wish they would have. And we're going to talk about some resources and opportunities to best and most robustly support the newest little babies. At Family and Child Health, when we say family, we mean a group of people who come together to invest in the next generation, to care for pregnant and postpartum people, and to surround babies and children with folks who are ready and able to help them thrive. There are lots of different kinds of families throughout Lane County, and we are here to support them all. Family and Child Health currently delivers 5 programs, each with a slightly different eligibility criteria. Each family served through one of our home visiting models we offer is met in their home or a location of their choice. Who creates their care plan with the staff supporting them and collaboratively decides on visit frequency. In our long-term home visiting programs, they are all relationship focused. Like I said, long-term, and by that we mean 6 months or greater in duration, intensive, and centered on the family's heart's desire. What is most going to help this new family succeed in life? The average family in our programs is served twice monthly for 18 to 24 months. We offer 3 home visiting programs with a registered nurse, Nurse Family Partnership, Babies First, and Cocoon, each program serving a slightly different population. We deliver the Healthy Families Oregon program in partnership with Parenting Now via a subcontract, where family support specialists who are specially trained parenting educators serve families throughout Lane County regardless of income. And we're also very pleased to announce that since the last time we were here before the board, we have officially launched Family Connects Oregon, a universally offered in-home nurse visit provided to all interested Lane County families at 3 weeks of age for their infant. Nurse Family Partnership is our largest nurse home visiting program, and much of the focus of our discussion today will center around Nurse Family Partnership. NFP focuses on first-time parents most historically, pairing them each with a registered nurse early in pregnancy who can continue to support the family until the child turns 2 if the family desires. It operates with 3 foundational goals: improve pregnancy health outcomes for the mother, improve child health outcomes, and improve family economic self-sufficiency. How are these goals achieved? They're in the program name, by pairing specially trained registered nurses with families to work towards the goals the family has for self-sufficiency. It's considered the gold standard of home visiting and one of the most evidence-based programs in the nation to reduce child abuse and neglect, improve family employment, and improve health outcomes. Many consider it a triple win. It improves the health of the birthing parent, the generation that is parenting right now today. It improves the health of the baby, our future generation growing up to work and teach and live here in Lane County. And it improves a family economic outlook over time, reducing government spending on services for the family. Every $1 invested in Nurse Family Partnership, when I talk about that sort of economic self-sufficiency, results in a $6.10 return on investment to Oregon here. And that's because over time, families need less reliance on services such as Medicaid, SNAP, WIC, and their children need less support as they enter school age. And we'll talk a little bit more about those outcome details in a moment. On the screen is a summary of the most robust outcomes seen in the national research for Nurse Family Partnership. NFP is unique in that it was researched in a randomized controlled trial in the development. So eligible moms were randomized to either receive Nurse Family Partnership or to receive the standard of care in their community. So these are national research outcomes from that data. In nurse home visiting, one of the most powerful impacts is the ability to create change for both the mother and the child. That's the power of home visiting. The moms served have lower rates of tobacco use, have reduction in preterm delivery, reduction in closely spaced birth, and have much more successful employment and increase in employment. Their babies, in turn, are more likely to be born full term, have lower ER use. And when you follow these kiddos through to school age, so I'm going to remind you the program ends at age 2, but the data has tracked these children until they become school age, adolescence, into adulthood from the initial trials. You see a shocking 67% decrease in behavioral and intellectual problems among school-age children, and an astounding 48% reduction in child abuse and neglect among families served in Nurse Family Partnership. This means less children in Lane County involved with child welfare, less children needing behavioral support plans in schools, and children growing up ready and eager to learn and participate in our community. What I think is always especially impressive about this program is that this robust return on investment, that 6-to-1, and the health outcomes we just discussed are all seen while simultaneously serving the highest needs families in our community. Lane County Nurse Family Partnership team serves one of the most complex and high support needs groups of families in the nation. We were recently called out for having one of the highest risk factors of the nation, meaning we're doing an excellent job reaching out to, recruiting, and supporting our greatest and most vulnerable families in our community. What always jumps out to me when I look at the list is the trifecta of challenges so many in Lane County are facing: housing instability, mental health concerns, substance use. I see 90% of our clients have a significant mental health concern as they welcome their babies. 44% are unhoused or unstably housed. 40% are struggling with substance use conditions. And that first bullet there, the annual median income, annual, not monthly, is $9,000 to $12,000 annually for the families in our program. NFP is an opportunity to address these needs the parents are facing right now in parenting, but also prevent those needs as their infants grow up and hopefully experience less adversity and more success than their parents. I shared a moment ago on the national outcomes, but one of the big powerhouses behind NFP is robust data. In public health, we like to follow the data. We like to know that our interventions work, not just that they feel good, but do they make a difference? And we know NFP works not just nationally, but right here in Lane County, because our local program outcomes have been tracked since 2012 when the program launched here. Since program launched, we've had 88% of the babies enrolled in the program are fully immunized. 98% of these babies are breastfed for some duration. 90% of these children are born full term. And think about that. These are some of the highest risk pregnancies in our community, and 90% born full term. But even more impressively, we see a 25% reduction in intimate partner violence occurring in the home of Nurse Family Partnership clients. Children cannot grow up to be their best selves in homes with cycles of violence and abuse, and NFP helps families interrupt that cycle, stop the intimate partner violence, and heal to create true and lasting family healing and connection. As you review these outcomes and hear the needs of families served by Family and Child Health, it's common for folks to wonder, so just how does this change come about? So I'd like to spend a little bit of time telling a story today. I'm going to use the name Jessica for the mom in this story and Sam for the baby. Jessica, like many clients, was young when she was referred to Family and Child Health, just 19, referred via her WIC appointment. Her family had not had a lot of financial resources growing up. Her parents were not married. She spent time being raised in the home of her mother and her father, and some time being cared by both sets of grandparents. This resulted in frequent moves, which had made it challenging for Jessica to stay focused at school. She'd attended 5 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, and 2 high schools, and when she was going into 11th grade, she dropped out. She just didn't have the capacity to go to one more school. Because she hadn't completed high school or had her GED, not surprisingly, she struggled to find gainful employment. She'd been with her baby's father for about 3 months when she became pregnant, and they broke up soon after she told him she was pregnant. He wasn't interested in becoming a dad at this point in his life. At her first visit with her nurse, she shared, "I want more for my baby. I want my baby to have the opportunities I didn't have." Stable, consistent, nurturing relationships were not something Jessica had consistently experienced. Not from her family, and unfortunately due to so many different schools, not from the school system or social services. Nurse Family Partnership was the first time she had had an ongoing relationship with a trusted healthcare professional or social service agency in her life. Every time she shared a little bit more about her trauma or her history or how she slowly disclosed that she was using cannabis to cope with her anxiety or that she had used methamphetamines when she dropped out of high school, she would get a little hesitant to connect with her nurse. She'd maybe respond to outreach a little less frequently. But in Nurse Family Partnership, we know to expect this. Disclosures of challenging life situations can lead individuals to wonder, is it safe to trust? Will they still support me? Am I too much? Her nurse kept calling, kept scheduling those appointments, and kept the connection nurtured. Slowly, Jessica began to trust that someone could be there to help her and help her baby. By the time her pregnancy was wrapping up, she had been very consistent in attending visits in the last few months. She'd accepted referrals to quite a number of social service providers and healthcare teams. And after lots of support and getting proper medical management for her anxiety, she had stopped using cannabis. Jessica's baby Sam was born full term and a healthy weight. And the power of using a nurse is that they can pivot then to the child's needs after delivery. So the nurse began providing in-home education and support on lactation, on how to make sure Sam was gaining weight and meeting his milestones. I'm sure the moms in the rooms especially remember those early days worry of, is my baby eating enough? Is he healthy? That fear can be especially strong and potent for moms with a pre-existing anxiety disorder. When Sam was 4 months old, his developmental screening done by his registered nurse showed some mild delays. The quick detection allowed increased services and support in the home, working with Jessica to teach her how to be her child's first teacher, engage in play, and promote Sam's development. By his 18-month developmental screening, he was right on track, top of the chart even, having caught up. Without early detection, he might have entered preschool still struggling. As Sam approached a year and was beginning to be more mobile, Jessica was able, like so many moms, to start thinking about, what are my needs? What are my goals? Her nurse connected her to GED programs locally, helped her learn the organization and study habits she had never consistently learned growing up, and helped her complete her GED. Upon completion, she set her sights on becoming a teacher so that she could help kids in her community who experience things similar to her own life. At program graduation from Nurse Family Partnership, Sam was a happy, healthy, thriving 2-year-old enjoying his days in preschool, while Jessica was successfully enrolled at Lane Community College, well onto her way to her goals and working part-time. So that's just one example of a family. There are many families like Jessica and Sam in our community that have benefited from Nurse Family Partnership. Now I'd like to shift a little bit to discussing some opportunities on the horizon. NFP has traditionally been focused on first birth families. However, over the last decade, Changent, the National Service Office for NFP, has been evaluating the research on serving what's called multiparous or subsequent birth families. And so far that data is really robust and promising. Only NFP sites with the highest, strongest outcomes are allowed to begin offering services to subsequent birth families after a very rigorous application. Lane County was recently selected as one such site to offer services to multiparous families through the Nurse Family Partnership model. We recently learned only 12 sites in the nation were selected for this honor this year. This is a lot of program benefits for our community and a lot of fiscal benefits. It would allow us to transition our Oregon-specific program, Babies First, to expanded NFP, thus providing consistent programs. When you offer less programs while still serving the same amount of the community, you can create a lot of program efficiencies, from data entry to support staff efficiencies, and be assured of robust data tracking. That's one of the things that NFP brings that some of our other service array does not bring, is that ability to know what are the data right here in Lane County saying about our family's outcomes. We can anticipate similar outcomes for NFP-X or multiparous families seen as we reviewed a few minutes ago. We know that we'll continue to serve the families with the greatest need. The data showing that these families have a substantially increased rate of improved well child care visits in connection to those important pediatric milestones and improved postpartum care access for moms. This also allows us to better support our staff because it comes with a robust staff training and access to readily available evidence-based curriculum and teaching. The best moment of opportunity for us to support a family is always as they welcome that first child, before those habits are developed and ingrained and set people up on the success for their first baby's path. However, any moment when we can connect is the next best opportunity, and NFP-X would allow us to provide the most robust support possible to these subsequent families ready for support. So that was the what and the outcomes, and I'm going to hand it over to Brian to talk to you a little bit about the financial side.
May I steal the keyboard? Thank you. So Chair and Commissioners, thanks for having us. I'm really going to pivot a little bit, but as you've heard up to this point, our family and child health programs really provide a broad collection of services that support our supportive programs for some of Lane County's highest need families. And so at full capacity, we serve about 300 to 400 families per year through about 3,700 home visits, or probably an average of about 10 home visits per year per family. That varies by program, but certainly it's an intensive, direct, supportive relationship building program, a suite of services that supports families. So these programs are intended to support family success. So like really set folks off on the right foot, set them up for just opportunities that may not have been in front of them in the past, and really to see the potential and opportunity before them. And you've heard about the outcomes that come from this. The very real stories that have play in our communities that repeat over and over and over again from these relationship-based programs. So what I'd like to do now is I'm going to shift to the very practical side of what it means to keep these services going and what it means to provide them in the community. It's really the very real reason why we're here today, because of a funding gap that now exists in the funding in our Nurse Family Partnership program because of decisions that were made at the state level. And I'll walk you through that in just here a minute. It's helpful to understand that our family and child health programs are funded through a mix of different sources. We do receive slightly more than half of our funding through local, state and federal grants that provide a good portion of what helps our programs get off the ground. But we also receive support through direct billing. So the services we provide, we're able to bill for Medicaid for supporting those services. And that is often referred to as targeted case management. And targeted case management is a very special, it's kind of a unique approach in the sense that the way it works is a local match is required in order to leverage the federal dollars. It's actually a very strong investment model for us in the sense that every $4 we put into targeted case management to bring down federal dollars results in $10 locally, which are directly reinvested back into this program. So it's a very strong investment model. At the same time, it's also modeled in a way that suggests that we are investing directly in these services, and we're showing that we're committed to what it takes to sustain the program in the long run, and the federal government matches us with that very generously. Unfortunately, what's happened is, well, actually, let me take a step back. So up until the beginning of last fiscal year, Lane County has generally supported this program through general fund. It has provided the local match that has made it possible for us to leverage down the Medicaid dollars. In the most recent fiscal year, the state actually stepped in and said, we'll provide the match for Nurse-Family Partnership in particular, which is why we're talking about Nurse-Family Partnership as specifically today. That allowed us locally to not have to make that investment specifically for Nurse-Family Partnership. And it positioned us particularly well in that for sustainability and the long-term success of that program. The legislature actually had put forward a bill in the most recent session that we had expected to move forward that would have provided that funding ongoing, that would have supported with the local match for Nurse-Family Partnership indefinitely, to the extent that's indefinite. So, but that did not pass. That did not move forward in the legislature, and so we are now in the position locally of needing to figure out how we might fill that gap. And so that's really why we're here today, to talk about that. I'm going to walk you through 3 scenarios that I think it's helpful to understand what it would mean if we invest fully, but what it might mean if we don't, and what those implications might be for how we serve in the community and how that will be felt directly. So that's what I'm going to focus on. Again, I just want to, the one part that you do need to understand is that we do bring in we estimate this current fiscal year will probably bring about 1.7 million or more than 1.7 million in billing revenue that supports the program and allows us to continue the services. The local match required to do that is about a little more than $700,000 to make that possible, which is, again, a pretty good return. So I'm going to start here with the first option, which is the recommended plan. This is the model that would allow us to sustain services locally in Lane County and would have the least impact on the services that we're providing. There is a slight reduction in staffing that we've built into this model to account for the fact that we are indeed needing to invest more, but and balance our services as best we can. So we've made a reduction in a support position, but that'll have minimal impact on our service levels. So the end result of this, we've already invested locally about $540,000, close to $550,000. That has allowed us to fund part of our match for 2 of our other programs, as well as some of the staffing and support services that are needed to run the program. To fund it fully, we would have to invest an additional $392,000 approximately. And that would allow us to fully leverage all the dollars that we can bring down from the federal government and to sustain the program with minimal impact on services. That's the most robust and significant program and allows us to continue to serve 300 to 400 families consistently per year. So that's option 1. It's, of course, the one we recommend. But I also recognize that we are dealing with a lot of financial questions as an organization and many different challenges in front of us, so it's helpful to understand other approaches that we might take. The second option shifts our investment more directly into just getting that required match. Pulling down as much federal dollars as we can possibly pull, because that's our best way to leverage the money into the program with the most stable investment side. But it does have very real impacts. It would result in some staffing reductions on the support side of our current program model, the way we're set up. It would put us below a level that's considered sustainable and supportive of our nursing staff. It would mean they're not working at their fullest capacity because they are needing to do services that are otherwise supported currently as we're staffed. And it does mean that we would likely see some impacts in how effectively we're able to follow up on direct referrals and how people uptake in the program and how quickly they sign up. So we would anticipate it could have an impact of about 10% reduction in services. That's just a reasonable guess on this. That does mean about 30 to 40 fewer families would be supported through the program if we funded at this level alone. And we would reduce 3 to 4 positions to balance our budget. So it does have very real impacts, but it is an alternative approach that we could consider. The third model is the current as funded model. If we invest no further money into the program, has some very real implications for what we can continue to do going forward. And I would anticipate that this choice would have longer term impacts for us in particular because it would result in the loss of a couple of our programs that have served the most vulnerable members of our community, including families who have very complex, whose children have very complex medical needs, and some families in just the most financially risky and other challenging situations. It would result in the loss of 5 to 6 positions, including nursing staff, which does mean we're not able to provide the same level of service in the community and serve as many folks. We would anticipate 100 fewer families served at a minimum. So it is a pathway. We would be shifting the current investment to, again, leverage as much of the federal dollars as we can, just because that brings in the most income, but it's not going to be at the full level that we would need to really provide full level of service. So while we would still be doing the best we can with the resources available, the impacts would be felt very much so in our community. So we think it's just important to understand what that would look like if we maintain as we are currently. Meanwhile, we also recognize that there's a lot of reasons to investing in the long-term sustainability of this program and what it would mean to help us just be good stewards of the dollars that are in front of us. So there's a couple things that we are continuing to work on. Nurse Whitney here also talked about the investment in the Nurse-Family Partnership expansion model. We have an opportunity there that we've applied for about approximately $930,000 investment over the next 3 years, which could lessen the burden if awarded to us. We won't know about that until August, but it is something we're continuing to push on. Even if we don't get it this round, it's something we can pursue in future rounds. So that's really focused on what we were talking about earlier about streamlining, aligning our programs more specifically, trying to get some efficiencies by having still very, very solid evidence-based programs, but maybe a smaller suite of services, but serving the same scope and a number of folks in the mix. So it also has strong revenue potential, and it also has an opportunity there to really sort of just pivot in a way that we think would be more successful in the long run. But those are one of our solid choices on the horizon. Also in the mix, there's still some opportunities in which the board may want to take some positions. Specifically, we've got the opportunity to come back to the state legislature and help them to make the right choice, to make that local investment that they really, we would benefit from and they really should consider. So revisiting that and continuing to push that. And then there's opportunity on the horizon to revisit the amount of revenue that comes in through billing. So they will be rate setting, or it could be rate setting on the horizon. Counties have been pushing the state to revisit that and start looking at the rate setting. It hasn't been revisited since before COVID, so it's been a while, and it is an opportunity to align that better with inflationary changes and increased costs, and that would help us to stabilize the program more too. So those are 2 areas we'd probably want to push on in the long run to just better position us locally to sustain our programs, and we continue to work on that as well. With that in mind, though, really what we're in front of you today is to really focus on what resources we might be able to shift into the program to stabilize us now. Again, this is a one-time investment for this year that we're asking. Future investments will be brought before the board through the typical budgetary process, and we'll be talking about what that looks like based on the circumstances at that time. Our recommendation is to go with the option one that we brought before you today, but you certainly have to think through all the considerations that are on the table. So I think with that, Chair, I'll pass it back to you, and certainly open to all of your questions.
One process point really quickly is what we are asking for today is direction. You will notice that there is not an order before you. That is because if there's a decision to contribute general fund, Christine Moody would bring that back to you in the form of an order based upon your direction for what option you selected.
Okay, Commissioner Krieger.
Thank you. I have other comments. I'm going to save them for a minute, but just to that point, it's my understanding The reason this wasn't in the current year budget is we were so optimistic about the passage of the state legislation, which would have not only benefited us, but the whole state, right? There's a real parity issue because there are only 7 programs, 9 counties that are benefiting from NFP because of a lack of a state match program. So it's not just us that would be advocating to bring this back in the next session. There's a whole statewide coalition for Nurse Family Partnership. All of the local public health departments have supported it. All signs were pointing towards passage. I think it was just a casualty of, frankly, the politicking of the session. And so that will change. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding this would have been in the budget that we just passed, were we not so confident that this state program was going to be in place. And that's just an important thing for us to remember. Is that?
That's correct.
Thank you.
And I'm thinking this ask is just to get us into the short session so that we can ask again so they can make the right choice. Is that what I'm hearing too, Brian?
We're looking for sustainability, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is bridge funding
Bridge.
as we see it right now.
Right. Commissioner Buck.
So if we're looking at option 1, which is just shy of $400,000, my question is, where would we look for those resources within our budget? Usually I would first reference reserves, but I know that reserves are going down in H&HS on a pretty regular basis because of all the changes that are occurring at the federal level, and we also have some capital construction projects that are trying to break even. So I'm not sure if this bridge funding is available in the reserves for Health and Human Services, or if the request is to find that funding in other monies. That could, the latter?
The latter, yeah.
Okay. So the latter to me generally means general fund dollars.
More likely than not, yeah.
And what are our reserves looking like in the general fund? Because I'm not sure what other bucket we would draw from.
Yeah, Chair, the general fund is typically the place that we would look. We are meeting our board adopted policy for reserves in the general fund, and so we would, this is not something we have the ability indefinitely to fund annually. But there's likely the ability to fund it for a year. The other potential opportunity would be to look at video lottery dollars. We did stretch those dollars, meaning video lottery reserve dollars. We have stretched those dollars rather thin as well, so it's more likely that it would be general fund. So again, I'm saying, I think, the request today is to say, do you want to direct us to identify available resources and then bring back to you an action that would tell you what the implications of that would be, and we would do that to say, okay, if your direction is we want to pursue option 1, then we would go identify where those resources would come from, and we would tell you what the impact would be.
Okay.
But just again to say, regardless of your action, we need to understand we don't have the capacity currently, and we of course all know the stress and strain on the general fund operating dollars, right? The annual funding. That's what becomes really difficult, and I think this request today is to have a conversation because we went through our budget cycle, and it wasn't until after our budget cycle that we were told about this action. We were hopeful up until the end of the session. It didn't go, so that's why we're having this, as you said, Chair, to pursue in the short session to see if we can get funding in the long term for it. There's one other thing I was going to say, but I can't remember what it was.
Commissioner Farr, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I do. Well, my suggestion would be to ask you to find us a hybrid of, what's the cocktail that brings us to that amount. But we have to have the fallback on it. My question is, if we are able to successfully find this amount of money, can you talk a little bit about assurances that we won't have to ask for it again? I mean, you've talked about it a little bit, but to let me know that this is not just putting gas in the car and the car's going to run out of gas down the street.
I can speak to that a little bit.
Okay.
So, if it were not for last year, this would have just been a continuation of a long-term general fund commitment dating back to 2012 of funding for these programs. Short of a state investment for the match, there is not an alternative source of long-term funding to sustain that match. So ultimately, it becomes a policy decision in terms of prioritization of programming with limited local funds. You know, the team has done a great job of showing you the outcomes and the return on investment in terms of that decision-making in the past. But we certainly will need clarity from you all if we are not successful in the short session around whether this continues to be a policy priority for the county. If it does not, we would have to look at reductions in programming.
That's clear. So I have another question. The notes that I took earlier said we needed 327,000. Did I just write down the wrong number?
392.
392, but my notes from last week.
I wasn't in those meetings, but
No, you called in, but we said you didn't need to be here.
yeah, I was excused.
The numbers are unchanged.
They're unchanged. Okay, so I just wrote down the wrong number. Okay, then I'm going to have a couple more questions about it, but clearly we have a program that has a ripple effect regarding its success. The success isn't on day one. Success is projected throughout a lifetime.
Yes.
And that's what we have to bear in mind. So many things competing for dollars, including $250,000 this morning for a deputy. For
72.
yeah, so and we know that to be the cost. That wasn't our money, but with that being said, the consideration we have is this the best way that we can spend the money regarding the services that we are expected to and sworn to provide? That's my question to me, and I'm inclined to say my inclination is to say this, Ms. Broker, actually find us an option for the money, and then we can decide is it how we're going to spend that money. But first, we have to have the option.
I fully support Commissioner Farr's direction. I mean, this is something that I value, and I think we provide a great service here. Looking at the numbers and just roughly 200,000, every 200,000 you lose 10 to 15% of your services. I think we need to look at fully funding this. I mean, I'm looking at option A.
I'm looking at I agree with all the comments made so far in the direction of Mr. Mokreisky, trying to find a bucket we forgot about in a corner where money's hiding. I don't know, but thank you for looking and facing that challenge. But I mean, I'm also looking at from like just a public's perspective, and we keep talking about prioritization. At some point, we're going to have to say no to a program to maybe make this more of a priority of any other program. And so I guess the question to Director Gray would be like, and I'm just in my head, and I know these two maybe not are related, but what if we had to say, we're really going to prioritize the start of life and these particular folks because we think the payoff over time is better, and do we pull money away from or divert money or resources from, let's say, our low barrier shelter we talked about at the stabilization center this morning? I mean, I know those probably aren't two comparables, but you kind of see where the public might relate those two together and say, well, we should do this more instead of that.
Sure. So, the Navigation Center specifically is state funding. There is no local funding involved in that particular contract, but there is a general fund contribution to homeless services, of course. All of that leverages funds into our community as well, or the vast majority of it leverages funds into our community. And so I think if you were to direct us to go back and look at where we could pull from in terms of the general fund contribution already going to Health and Human Services, we would have to pull up here is the full impact in terms of the funding that is leveraged into the community as well. And then, again, it becomes a policy decision where you all would prioritize how you are spending those precious dollars, and we will ultimately follow your direction. So however you want us to bring that back to you in terms of options, we can do.
And how does that push for better rates help us in the short run, or is there a short run with that, or is that a long-term kind of thought?
Do you feel like you can talk to that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So targeted case management is one of the areas of healthcare that is still a fee for service. So we get paid for every single visit done. And that rate of reimbursement is calculated on a state average is how the calculation method. So this is slightly simplified, but largely what they did when they did the previous rate setting is they look at the cost to operate services in every community in Oregon. So every county that participates in these programs submits their costs. So this is what it costs us to run the services. And then they look at how many visits were done during that interval. And they do some basic arithmetic and say, okay, so then on average, this should be our reimbursement rate. For this service is a rough ballpark. There's a little bit of more formula behind the scenes, but the reimbursement rate for us here in Lane County and for the big metro counties and for Jackson County and for Umatilla County is all the same. We're all getting the same fee for service amount. And now, as we all know, the cost to deliver services in each of those communities is wildly different. The cost of our staffing, our buildings, everything is different and hyper-local. So what many of the counties that have higher costs for service delivery is saying is that rate setting was almost too low when it was initially came out back in 2019. So that was a 2019 rate setting. It took effect then, fall of 2019, based on the 17-18 fiscal year. So we're looking quite a while back. If you think back to what were our costs for operating services back that far. So there's a push among many counties saying rate setting needs to happen more frequently and that we are overdue for a rate setting. So if that rate setting occurred, there is no crystal ball, of course, but I would assume that the costs are going to be shown to be higher to deliver the service. I can't imagine that there's a county that says, absolutely, for us it's cheaper than it was back in 2017. If so, maybe we should find out what they're doing and learn from them. So then that methodology, assuming it was similar, would most likely result in a rate increase. So then that means that for each visit we conducted, the rate would be more. Now the challenge in rate setting is always you never know. Are they going to talk about a 1% increase? Are they going to talk about a 20% increase? Your guess is as good as mine on that. But I do think it's time, as do many of our other counties, to say, let's at least run the numbers and say, what do the numbers say today in 2025 in a post-pandemic world with our current staffing costs?
And
I have one more question, but I think Commissioner Triggers wanted to ask the question. Go ahead.
This begs, also, who sets the rates? Is there a board? Is it OHA? Is it the legislature? Who does that?
It's DMAP at the state Medicaid office.
It's DMAP. And the formula, is there any chance, I mean, this is not the only program where Lane County gets dinged for a faulty formula, basically. So is it both the rate and is there an appetite for advocacy around the formula, or are we just sticking with rate changes?
They could open up opportunity for folks to give input on either. They have not previously opened up opportunity on the formula, but that certainly could be a policy request.
I think this may be an LGAC opportunity for those who sit on that particular committee. This is a place where we can pressure the agency and get action before having to wait for legislative session.
That would be me and you.
And well, also congratulations on the NFPX. I mean, that's a big deal. And speaks to another reason of why we need to preserve this program at the maximum level of funding we're able, because clearly we become a demonstration project that pulls more resource in. I mean, I'm hearing pretty much universal understanding of why this program matters, and I've shared before on a personal, when you were talking, Chelsea, about those, when your baby is new and the anxiety. I mean, I had to birth my first baby about 30 miles from my home, and I remember bringing her home and feeling like the back seat was too far away, and made Larry pull over so I could get in the back seat with her where her car seat was. That was how like anxious I was about what was happening. And then lived 60 miles from a WIC office that I relied on for what a lot of what I relied on the WIC nurses for would have been delivered by a nurse, by a home visiting nurse, the weights and measures and just the assurance and the help with early breastfeeding. And I was 3,000 miles away from my family of origin and new to that community. And so I'm in on the program, and I think we all are. But it also is starting to sound like there is an appetite for giving direction to our administrator to work to figure this out. As for the policy decision, I mean, if we hadn't been so confident about the state bill passing that would have provided the resource, Director Gray would have brought us a budget that likely had this program in it. So we won't next budget cycle necessarily be faced with it sort of pulled out as a one-off. You wrestle with that on our behalf and then bring us your best informed budget around program prioritization. So this gives a chance for you to hopefully not have to do that again, but if you do, to bring us that budget. And then my only like logistical question is, if this $930,000 3-year grant comes through for the NFPX program, or if the state passes or whatever, and our administrator has found some money, there's sort of a timing issue where we might be able to replenish or not draw all the funds you identify. Is that not right to backfill? So we're really looking for something that's a plan in case something else doesn't happen to keep the program going for another year, but it's possible we wouldn't even have to spend all of it.
It's always possible we wouldn't have to spend all of it. I think we should plan that we would spend all of it. We don't yet know about any of those other funding opportunities, but it is always our practice that if we do not spend the general fund that has been allocated, we do not draw it.
But those are swappable, right? The grant could replenish or backfill general fund dollars that get tagged for this.
It's possible that a certain percentage of it would kind of duplicate the existing funding, and we would prioritize that going toward the general fund contribution compared to other funding sources if that became an opportunity. What we don't know of is what more we're going to be asked to do with this money, and so we would anticipate that there being some increased cost related to staff training and moving the programs into NFPX. So it wouldn't be a one-for-one.
Great. And then my only other question is just on a programmatic side, is the geographic reach county-wide for NFP?
It is.
Yeah. Thank you.
Every new baby in Lane County is screened for services if the family is interested in one of our programs.
Anyone else? I have just two last questions. I want to make sure I understand this. You said something too, Chelsea, about the expanded nurse-family partnership, and the way you phrased it, I understood that maybe if this program gets the funding that Commissioner Trier's talking about, that $900,000, does this particular NFP program become larger and one of those smaller ones that's below the tree that you had drop away? So does that help us if the program drops away and we're not spending that kind of money and it shifts into this? Does that give us that nimbility to do that?
Yes, so what we're sort of envisioning with our NFP expanded eligibility idea is that we have currently 3 FTE of staff working in our Babies First and Cocoon programs, which are programs specific to the state of Oregon. They're very robust, strong programs, but they lack some of that national infrastructure and data support and staff resources because there's not as much behind them. So we would shift those staffing. There would be no change in the number of staff if we were awarded the grant, and if that was the policy direction received. Those staff would then begin working in nurse-family partnership, and we'd be able to serve both subsequent birth families and first birth families in the same model, which is you can sort of imagine if you're using one model and one data system and one team, you can extract some efficiencies on the back end, which is our hope. So that's where some of the potential savings would be, as well as, unfortunately, Babies First doesn't have as much robust data infrastructure to report out what are our local outcomes. and respond quickly versus nurse family partnership lets us track outcomes locally on a quarter by quarter basis. That if outcomes are excelling in an area, we can really replicate and scale and share out that information. And if we're seeing a struggle in an area, we can say, what's going on in our community right here? Why are we seeing, for example, maybe more tobacco usage? What's happening, so we can then address that and pivot in a much more nimble fashion, which also has some fiscal wins if we can be a little bit more responsive. Anything you want to add?
Great, just kind of a what-if doomsday question is my final one. If we decide or can't, if Mr. Mokraisi comes back and we don't have $392,000 to fund this, but we have something less than that, the foot that we put forward in the state, would that necessarily stab us in the back by saying, well, we can fund this for a lot less money, and then the legislature would go through on the short session and say, well, they don't need that much money, they need this, and it would basically, based on our unaffordability to fund it fully, would it then kind of bite us in the behind later? Do you see any issue with that?
If I think I understand what you're saying.
Anyway, he's kind of around right field, yeah, help me out.
I think I understand. So there are counties right now that don't offer this service or have had to cut this service in the last few years because they had no local funding. Now, had the legislature funded the bill like we were hoping and like we all believe is the right choice, those counties might have relaunched their program. That funding becomes a funding platform across the county. So they say, if you are delivering this service, you're eligible to draw down the match from the state if you choose to deliver the service. So then it becomes a county by county decision of, do they want to deliver the service? How much do they want to deliver the service? To what population reach they want? So I don't think it would make us ineligible for that match in the future.
And if we technically underfunded this, it wouldn't also put a precedent on the legislator to say, well, they don't need that much anyway to start with, and would diminish maybe the award going forward. That's kind of my thinking here, is that, if we can't fully fund it, is it going to end up hurting us in the long or short run?
I think where it might, could I?
Yeah.
Well, where it might catch us is more our ability to recover from that loss. So as we lose the infrastructure that supports this program in the long run, we take a fair amount of energy to get us back up to where we need to be. I think that's the real risk. As long as we're sustaining the program at some level and we're still providing that service, we're meeting the state's requirements. And I don't know that it necessarily puts us at a funding risk for the future, but it does mean we may not be positioned for that funding should we want it anyway. So I think that's the real risk we face.
I think especially a risk in terms of trained staff. These programs are often referred to as the ICU of public health nursing. The ICU of community nursing, we're serving those highest needs families, and that requires a fairly hefty investment in staff training. We're very fortunate to have a very skilled, long-standing staff that are really committed to this. So if we didn't fully fund that, then you're almost starting over in training people.
Well, from a branding perspective, that's a really good point. ICU of nurses, that might have been a headline at the first slide. I think maybe next time you present that, because that's a really strong argument as to how important this program is. So that just kind of hit me in the gut. So thank you for sharing that, Commissioner Farr.
Thanks. And the destruction of the infrastructure, I was going to touch on that point. And alas, other counties have already done away with their infrastructure. So them reconsidering bringing this back, they have to take that into account. However, if they see it happening successfully, it gives them more incentive to do so. And the work we do in Lane County can be significantly catalytic to what happens in other counties. And that's no small part of what we're doing here. And it becomes a matter of regarding the offsets for either underfunding or seeming like we might be able to do it without their help. I think that becomes a matter of how good we are at explaining the program at the state level to 91 people who I venture to guess the vast majority of them don't think much about it. So when I say that, don't think very often about it. So, sorry, I run on sentence. So I'll go back to what I suggest is that we ask Mr. Mokraisi to find the full funding and then make a decision based upon whose pockets we're raiding. No, that's not the right.
Our own.
Right.
Well, our own, which one, is it this little pocket here or is it?
Yeah.
Is it
They're
couch cushions
all
or is
pretty
it
little pockets.
Yeah.
the winter jacket we put away, hoping we left money in it?
Precisely.
So does the head nods of this direction what you need? Do you need it as a formal assignment later?
I don't think so.
Okay, yeah, we got 5 head nods, looks to me like, and future board and future Health and Human Services will figure out what dollar amount that comes back with and what we do then.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And Ryan, you called it option 1, I think is what you said.
Yeah, I think we're all leaning toward option 1 for sure, especially if we have the hope of short session coming back to quote-unquote their census, if I can say that, yeah. Good deal. All right, well, very great presentation. Thanks for the information, great data. And Dr. Warner, Dr. Lucky, thanks for joining us. Great to have you in the room.
Thank you.
Director Gray, thank you very much.
Appreciate all the work ahead of this.
We could just leave the baby out.
I was just gonna say.
If you need some cute visual aids, we're always happy to help.
He's got eyebrows.
I'll do that on with a shirt. All right, we're at item 10, our commissioner's business. We have announcements and comments and remonstrance and committee reports. We've been lumping those together, so anybody who wants to take 3 of those on at once and give us some announcements and what's going on, happy to start with anyone who raises their hand first. Commissioner Buck.
I'll start with one, the EMS funding task force that we approved as a board. It's just begun. That task force, again, is just focusing on our ambulance service throughout the county. LCOG is facilitating those conversations, as they are also facilitating the Eugene Springfield fire merger. So they're familiar with that. We spent 2 hours on Friday just familiarizing ourselves with the scope and context of the issue. Eugene Springfield Fire Chief Caven kind of largely facilitated that. The problem is quite complex, as they all tend to be. And our Director Gray also was there. We have, it's multi-jurisdictional, and we had a lot of the fire chiefs from around the county participate. So we might be taking some time to collect some data now for the next month, and presenting that at the following meeting to everyone. You know, we were tasked with this to be an 18th month review and recommendation. I look at it largely similar to how we structured the public safety task force, even though it has different group of folks mixed in. And I've suggested, you know, we talk to them and learn a little bit about how they facilitated their task force so we can make ours as efficient as possible. So we'll continue that work, but it will be quite challenging because it does rely on things that are outside of our jurisdiction, just like the Public Safety Task Force. They were very clear with us that Measure 5 and Measure 50 were a large factor in finding resources for that particular section of public safety. I won't be surprised if we find some similar situation, knowing that the large majority of their calls are coming from Medicaid, Medicare clients. So reimbursement rates are challenging, and those are often set at a level that's very outside of our jurisdiction. Also learned and would share with the group, since I'm learning about our role as the county in ambulance services, other counties collectively at their board level set those rates. We in Lane County actually assign those out to local jurisdictions and fire districts to find what they need in their communities. So that is the reason why we haven't necessarily seen that kind of decision-making come to our board level, because we've delegated it out. But it was really interesting to know that other communities or other counties in the state actually do that work at the board level. And that may be largely because they're smaller than we are, and it's just easier to manage that way. But there's a lot I'll be learning, and I'll continue to share as we meet.
Great. Great update. Thank you.
Lane County Fair. opens tomorrow. Yay. Runs 11 to 11 every day, 11 to 8 p.m. Sunday, which is the last day. So get out there and eat some cotton candy and look at a pig and get on the Ferris wheel and admire the quilts and all the great things that there is to do. Some pig. Yep.
Zombie.
And along those lines, if your kids want ride bracelets, the deadline, I think, is 5 o'clock today. So,
Oh, to buy them in advance.
yeah. You can't buy them after the fair opens.
Yeah.
I'll just touch, thank you, Chair. Just touch bases on MAC and PHB. Poverty and Homelessness Board, as you all know, is a multi-governmental board that we participate in. It's a Lane County board, which has participation from City of Eugene, City of Springfield, but also from the general rural community as a whole. You'll be seeing a recommendation in the next meeting or the meeting after regarding a couple of new members of the board. Just to update you on what happens there, we have an interview team that interviews the various new members for the different positions that we have on the Poverty and Homelessness Board. And some of the positions are voting and some are non-voting. But the non-voting participate in the discussion as actively as the voting members, but the voting members fill specific slots. The board itself meets 11 times a year, generally. There are other subcommittee meetings of that board. And 5 of those meetings are what's called the executive committee, which is the executive committee is Sean Murphy, who is the chair. Sean is the executive director of Laurel Hill. Been on the Poverty and Homelessness Board since the outset. Matthias Smith, who represents youth. I am one of the co-chairs. I'm on the executive committee along with the Mayor of Eugene and the Mayor of Springfield. So you get a lot of recommendations from the Poverty and Homelessness Board. What's come from the PHB in the past are strong recommendations surrounding veterans housing, a strong recommendation surrounding emergency winter response. The first time we met as a board, it was in October, and we were wondering what we're going to do this weekend. It was going to be cold. Since then, of course, we're not looking at this weekend. We're looking at ongoing programs that have been championed by the multi-governmental body, which is the Poverty and Homelessness Board. And the other is the multi-agency collaborative, which was initially assigned to allocate the emergency money provided by the gubernatorial. It was 23-02, I believe, was the number that provided emergency money for local housing services. That board is not unlike the Poverty and Homelessness Board in the scope of what it touches, but is unlike the Poverty and Homelessness Board in that there are no elected officials on that board. It's all community members. And it really is a nice adjunct. You don't need to think about it too much at this point in time, but you will hear recommendations coming from both of those boards. And the other thing I'll point out is that the Mental Health Advisory Committee, its agenda and its strategic plan really have a strong overlap with the Poverty and Homelessness Board's agenda and strategic plan. And we're going to be looking at kind of seeing how they meld together, not to add workload for staff, but to streamline workload for staff. You'll hear more about that.
All right, great. Thank you for that. Seeing no other announcements or any committee reports that we need to know of, we had those. Future board assignments. Mr. Mokrasky, do we need to formalize the quarterly report that we had talked about for the NAB Center?
Let me think about that. I don't think so, because you took action it was in the motion, wasn't it? Who made the motion?
No, it wasn't on the motion.
No, the order was just to renew the contract.
Maybe why don't you do that then?
Okay.
Why don't I do, how about this? Why don't I do it as an assignment? Seeing head nods from that. Go ahead.
Well, and I was waiting until when we had that this morning. Is that something that, I mean, I would leave this to you to talk to Kate, or for Eve to talk to Kate. We get quarterly updates on services for homeless street outreach and homeless services. If it's a standalone thing, it is, but to the point of streamlining work for staff, could it just be a sort of data point that gets rolled into those quarterly updates? As far as I'm concerned, either would satisfy what it seems like the board is after.
That's probably more efficient.
This is
if it's okay with you to receive that within that report, an update. I think the question would be, I would think you'd at least want some note, a verbal note, as they're going through the presentation, that you'd have both data in the report, but also, a highlight of areas of concern or positive areas of movement there related to the NAV Center.
I guess I'm just asking the board if, I would leave it to Kate if the board is okay with leaving it to Kate. I know they try to theme those sometimes, and so it might actually be an awkward, but I would be fine offering that if that's the best mechanism, either routinely or sometimes, to just use the existing quarterly homeless services update as a way to report out on the NAV Center, that would satisfy as far as I'm concerned, rather than adding another quarterly report from her team on that one item.
If it could be built in.
It might
on her
sometimes
part,
work and sometimes not, and giving her that flexibility.
Yeah.
Question?
No, I was gonna say, especially since we just had the update, and I mean, it's almost gonna be on the quarterly at this point anyhow. I think it's great use of time.
In the sake of efficiency, and you said subject matter, that kind of made me think that maybe part of the subject matter would be community safety as part of just a bullet point in a slide, where, you know, all the services, because I think Commissioner Bucket mentioned that we have a lot of community buildings and services around the county, and this is really one we're thinking about and hearing about, and that maybe it's just a generalized item that, hey, generalized safety over 20 some of our sites are great. We had a couple instances here, and we implemented this there in this site particular. Then that way the county citizens would at least know that we're actively thinking about that subject matter over the broad scope of our work, not necessarily singling out the Land Navigation Center. Clear as mud? Okay, sounds good. The other thing that I was going to suggest is there any interest among the board of getting Everyone's Village, Gabe Petrowitz, back in front of the board for ideas to serve low barrier clientele as a presentation at this point?
I would say we could get multiple benefit from that. One, understanding how it's different to, for instance, the navigation center. Because when you try and compare numbers from one service to another service, you can't really do it. You can't say, well, we are able to do this much with this much money. Well, you have a different set of resources. And just being able to understand that sometimes, because of the nature of things, it costs more per unit than other ways of presenting. When I say more per unit, whatever the unit may be, beds, armchairs, whatever the unit may be. And so I would appreciate that, because if we can find ways to more efficiently deliver services by using existing models that we can take a look at and adapt them to the Lane County way of doing things. Mm-hmm. And when I say that, we are a government body, we're not a private body. We don't have the gazelle-like ability that a private entity often does have, because of the nature of the way money is, the way we get money. So, yes. So in other words, yeah, I think looking at successful programs to see if it's something, what elements of it make it successful, and if it can be replicated someplace else, if we can facilitate that replication.
Would that be in a form of a work session or just a presentation? What's usually the format on that?
Presentation, John.
Presentation, gentlemen?
I wonder, I'm not opposed to it, but I wonder about bringing one particular provider in when we have so many, some of whom we contract with, some we don't, whether what they present is going to be translatable to us versus how staff understands the constellation of providers. Most of the things we do is on an RFP basis. I wonder if it's, again, this could just be working through the administrator and the H&HS director to work with Kate Budd on, maybe it's a panel of providers. I just hesitate to bring one provider in to talk to the board when it's not, this might be a bigger topic, us understanding what the RFP process is, rather than highlighting one provider in front of the board when we have so many and there's so many different models. And as Commissioner Farr said, there's a lot of different apples and oranges and units. So how transferable what he says before us as a presentation is to our policy role versus, I know each of us has gone out there to just visit and learn about what he's doing. I find huge value in that. So just trying to understand what we would get out of that would help our role versus what our staff understand about the network of providers. Just wondering what the best way is. And maybe it's more of a provider panel, if that's what we're after, to learn all the different ways services are being delivered and the different clientele.
Buster.
What if that got wrapped up into Kate Budd's quarterly, and every quarter there was a panel that picked a different nonprofit or for-profit that is providing those kind of services. And we got to learn more about how the different entities operate and what they prioritize. Because I think one thing, kind of like what Commissioner Farr hit on, is we're all looking for the most efficient way of doing this. And I don't think that's, I mean, yes, Everyone's Village is doing a great job, but I would like to hear from more than just Everyone's Village and to learn the efficiencies, and maybe coming out of that we find different paths of combining different ways of doing the same things to get to that. I mean, I was just looking at the number, and if I know, and there's differences between Everyone's Village and Navigation Center, but that would almost be, if they had that 4 million or 3 point, it'd almost be 350 people they were serving a year. Yeah. I mean, that's that's almost double what Navigation Center is currently doing. So I could see great benefit from adding a half an hour at Kate Budd's quarterly update.
I wouldn't mind doing that. I'd love to hear about our providers and the good work they're doing. I don't want to do it in a way that feels like they're pitting each other against other providers. I would like it, like we're highlighting a particular provider.
And really hitting the highlights. For me personally, the benefit of that would be I'd be able to more clearly articulate to people who don't know that there are nuances of difference between providers that cause one to it cost more per person than another. And just being able to, if somebody comes up to me on the street and says, well, why does it cost you $58,000 per bed, where it costs them $20,000 per bed? Well, here's the difference in the beds. So I think we'd get great benefit out of it as a Board of Commissioners, because we're expected to be able to tell people what we're doing and why it costs what it costs. So I could see an ultimate benefit in that.
We might want to present some structure for what we want, so there's consistency. Donated land versus purchased land, privately owned versus publicly owned. What kinds of training requirements, right? It's like the difference between mobile crisis and other street outreach programs. There are training requirements for who's on the rig that come to us from the state. Like, there's a lot of different inputs. So getting people to be giving us information in a way that is as close to apples information, if that's what we're after.
It is reminiscent of the school board presentations that we used to get based on one building. Why is one building doing this? Another building's doing it differently. Yeah. And as a school board member, you get those presentations and you say, oh, now I understand more clearly.
And who's being served? The level of acuity. I mean, that cannot be discounted as a driver of cost when you're serving high acuity medical and mental health needs. It's more expensive to work with those folks.
So, I mean, one option would be to start with, I was trying to think, we were talking about the policy lab earlier, start with something small and then sort of build from there. If you're interested in doing a work session, it might be appropriate to do a Wednesday work session. We can ask our human services team, Kate and James, to pull together 3 to 4 service providers, if that's what you're focused on, to do a Wednesday work session to sort of present a little bit like a round table, where they would present their model of care. That could easily be a 60 to 75 minute presentation. You can see if that's valuable to you, and if you really like it, and if you'd like to build upon that by having more things incorporated, and then maybe further the assignment at that point. But that may be a way, if you'd like to do this, your assignment is to direct staff to prepare a work session, to invite a number of service providers to present. You may include Everyone Village if that's one you're particularly interested in, and then maybe just ask Kate Budd to sort of identify the service providers that she thinks in addition to that might be good to highlight, and then have them come and present. So that's just a suggestion if you're looking for a place to start.
Well, I mean, maybe they share subject matter. Bring 3 people of low barrier initial goals that are from low barrier to permanent housing, and let us look at contrast and compare. But I still think that I understand that we want to highlight things, but at the same time we also want to make objective decisions on maybe if we need to pivot. This is what we've been doing for a long time, and it's costing a lot of money, and are we really getting the best bang for our buck? Now that we know this is going on, could we make some sort of shift or change? I think that's valuable for us to be able to become more efficient with our money. So
we have a good place to start, right on our own website. It's Lane County Shelter Finder, and if you could look at the different flags on this map here, and what do the different shelters do? What do they provide? Everyone Village is on here, for instance, as is, well, I can't drill down quite as quickly as possible, but as is Dusk to Dawn and, you know, the various shelters. And so they have different clientele, they have different funding mechanisms, and they also have a different expected outcome. So anyway, Steve, if you were looking at a place to start, we may already have it.
Okay, awesome. I just have one question that may be kind of unrelated to the future board assignments. I was asked the other day about Egan Warming Centers moving forward and about who finds locations for those to happen, if there's rentable or purchasable locations. I just, if someone could maybe off staff kind of give me the lowdown on that, that would help for an issue I have, so.
Yeah.
Good. All right, review on the assignments, Mr. Oh, sorry, Christian Buck, go ahead.
I have one, which is a follow-up of our discussion earlier, kind of like our previous topic. I had brought up the fact that when it comes to requests for proposals through Health and Human Services, that we don't have a local preference policy similar to our community benefits bidding protocol. And I'm wondering if we're willing to entertain some policy work sessions about if that's something that we would like to add. Maybe it's not, but I think it might be worth having some conversations about. Director Gray in the moment said she'd be willing to entertain that and come back to us. So if there's enough head nods for that, we can do a work session on that.
I support that, and the reason is I always would prefer to look inside to find the solutions. Sometimes you can't find a solution, you know, inside, and sometimes you do have to go outside, and sometimes you go outside when you really could have found a solution inside. So that may be an incentive or an impetus to go in that direction. So I'm cool
You
with
can
it.
see that dovetailing really nicely with the previous assignment, as understanding the RFPs. I mean, the respondents respond, you know, based on what they have the capacity and the training to do, and the funding streams are different. Some people don't want to respond to an RFP to receive state or federal funds, for example. They choose not to. So I could definitely see those dovetailing nicely.
Great.
And again, we have just wonderful data right on our website.
Anyone else? Shmuel Karski, sounds like you got 3.
I'm running out of paper to write on. So the first one was the request to include the quarterly update, homelessness service quarterly update, to include an update on Navigation Center data and impacts. To include that in that quarterly update. So hopefully Jessica she'll get that. We do this, just so y'all know, we do this at the end of the meeting because our board coordinator watches, she uses it as a way to then put on our assignments. Commissioner Lovell's request that we do a presentation. It sounds like actually this is turned into a work session that would happen on a Wednesday where we would we'll direct staff in Human Services to pull together a small group of service providers, potentially representative of the various types of shelter and housing services we contract for, to invite them to present on the different models of care. And then the third request is Commissioner Buck's request for a work session on local preference, the potential of having a local preference, particularly related to H&HS contracts. So those are the 3. Hopefully I got that generally right. That's it.
Okay. Super. All right, is any other good for the order? If not, we will move on to our recess and into executive sessions. We have 2 afternoon executive sessions, so allow me to read those in before we recess for the afternoon of our regular meeting. The Board of County Commissioners will meet in 2 executive sessions. The first session will take place immediately following the recess of this meeting, and it is to consider information or records that are exempt by law from public inspection and to consult with legal counsel concerning the legal rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed. The session is held pursuant ORS 192.6602F and ORS 192.6602H, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. The second executive session will take place immediately following the conclusion of the first session. It is to conduct deliberations with persons designed or designated by the governing body to negotiate real property transactions and to consider information or records that are exempt by law from public inspection. It is held pursuant to ORS 192.6602E and ORS 192.6602F, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive sessions. All of the members of the audience are precluded from attending. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive sessions, except during this general subject of the session as previously announced. Members of the news media are not allowed to tape, video record, or otherwise record an executive session, and verbatim notes are prohibited. No decision may be made in executive session. We will return to our public session tomorrow, July 23rd at 11 a.m. in the Board of County Commissioners Conference Room, and we will give ourselves 7 minutes to transition to the exec session, so we'll meet here at 2:55 on the nose. We are recessed.